Is this a concept album about the failure to communicate, or just an attempt to muscle in on the North American market? The truth is probably a bit of both. If you listen to music critics and journalists, you'd be forgiven for believing that the landscape of 1979 took on a distinctly gloomy hue. A landscape defined by the drone of unknown pleasures, the spleen-venting disillusionment of Public Image Limited, or the pulse of Two Bay Army pointing the way to so much music in the early 80s. However, musicos tend to pinch their nose at the rather noisome reality, and that is a very different proposition. In fact, it was bands like Supertramp, Wings, 10cc, ELO and Queen, bands whose combinations of rock, pop, West End sensibilities and even vaudevillian pretensions, these occupied the hearts and minds of the masses in 1979. And then there was the monster that was Breakfast in America. The LP itself hit number 1 on the Billboard 200 album charts just a month after its release on May the 19th. It ended up holding the top spot for 6 non-consecutive weeks. That spring and summer, in fact. The third longest run of 1979 atop of the chart, just behind Led Zeppelin's In Through the Outdoor, and the Eagles' The Long Run. This album is described by Rolling Stone as a textbook perfect album of post-Beatles keyboard-centred English art rock, and it's one that strikes the shrewdest of balances between quasi-symphonic classicism and rock and roll. However, not everyone was enamoured with it. Village Voice critic Robert Christgau was not impressed with this album. He described it as a hooky album that evokes random grunts of pleasure, but lacks emotional substance because of the glib lyrics and no vocal personality, as opposed to accurate singing, and rhythmic thrust, as opposed to a beat. Whereas Supertramp's earlier records were defined by a kind of identity crisis. Crisis? What crisis, I hear you say? One defined by one critic as a desired oral style and a salty end-of-empire pessimism. Gone Hollywood is suffused in kind of romantic excitement as well as a sense of ennui, and Goodbye Stranger seems to be an endless fantasy about frivolous relationships and one-night stands, with some Beach Boys falsettos thrown in for good measure. There is a very much Englishman in New York vibe to this album, or should I say LA. Meticulousness was everything, and this album certainly displays an obsessive level of precision, I think, from the vibrant saxophone solo on the Logical song to the razor-sharp falsettos on Oh Darling. The horns on the title track to the crunch of the overdriven guitars intertwined with those rhapsodic and spangly melodies. The Logical song is McCartney-esque and fizzles and crackles with castanets and hand claps. Hodgson here becomes like an everyman figure who excoriates an education that is soulless, a kind of grad-grind approach to instruction.
And in this school you'll be brought up on it too. Stick to facts, sir, that is your charge here.
Rather than furnishing knowledge and sensibility, they showed me a world where I could be so dependable, clinical, intellectual and cynical. Interestingly, Rolling Stone says that he reels off 3- and 4-syllable assonances with a schoolboy's tongue-in-cheek worthy of Ray Davies and the Kinks.
A miracle, oh it was beautiful, magical.
Flamenco flourishes and a hot sax break helps deflate the tune's self-pity with wonderfully wry humour. Made by a band of Brits, those pesky Brits, living in Hollywood, in effect. This album comprises of a series of vignettes about modern life in America. It's a probing album that demonstrates how unsatisfying they felt the whole sort of Beverly Hills lifestyle to be. It's ironic and critical without being too waspish. I think it's a disillusioned sigh that we can detect here, rather than anything too salty. The original concept of the album was supposed to be an album about relationships, particularly drawing upon the fracturing relationship between Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson. The title of the album was originally going to be Hello Stranger, which perfectly speaks of that sense of alienation and distance. However, to quote Roger Hodgson, we realised that some of the songs really resembled two people talking to each other. I could be belittling his way of thinking while he would be challenging my way of looking at life. His beliefs are a challenge to mine while my beliefs are a challenge to his. We were thinking of making that the theme of the album, as we weren't communicating very well during the recording of it. However, the original concept, I think, was lost when Roger Hodgson felt that they should pursue a lighter tone. So the title of the album was changed from Hello Stranger to Breakfast in America. And according to Hodgson, the title was chosen because it was a bit of fun that matched the overall tone of some of the songs that were developing, or they were developing for this album. It was an album that was going to be different from their previous albums, and a record that would have mainstream appeal. So this album for me feels very much at cross purposes. We get the melodic jangle of a half concept album, one that vents a spleen of deteriorating relationships, and the other of a failed love affair with the USA. So I suppose it does tie in as a concept album in that respect. But I can't help but feel it's a bit of a conceptual dog's breakfast. Some critics felt it was an explicit satire of American culture and its way of life. It's certainly in 3 of the songs: Gone Hollywood, Breakfast in America and Child of Vision. However, all band members insisted that the references to American culture were mere coincidences and that there was no intention of making any satirical themes in the new album. But nevertheless, it's an album that prods at materialism, the quest for fame, television, California girls. They all have a place within the grooves of this exquisitely arranged pop rock masterpiece. If we think of the tracks on the album, Gone Hollywood was originally titled Heartbreaking, and it's very much about a protagonist that's very much disillusioned by the whole LA lifestyle, I think. His hopes of becoming a famous movie star become dashed as his path to the top is much more difficult than he imagined. This is a Rick Davis penned number. And it has to be said that the original verse, the ending verse for this, was much more depressing than the one they ended up with. They wanted the song to be lightened up, to be in keeping with the tone of the album. And there's some wonderful drumming on this track, and we must doff our cap to multi-instrumentalist John Helliwell. The logical song, the first single from the album. Hodgson often writes songs by singing over keyboard riffs. That's kind of the way he constructs things. And this is the way this track was formed. Logically, of course. This is one that was actually worked on for a long time, especially during the band's live sound checks, before finally completing. The track's main theme is how innocence and wonder of childhood are somehow corrupted, as we are taught to be responsible adults. Hodgson credited Rick Davis for coming up with the harmonies, vocal harmonies on this one, and we certainly must doff our cap to the wonderful bass work of Dougie Thompson. Goodbye Stranger, this seems to talk of a kind of emotional ephemera, as a series of one-night stands and casual relationships seem to be what very much defines the life of this protagonist. However, some feel that the chorus is a goodbye message to Roger Hodgson, saying goodbye stranger and thanking him for everything they'd lived together and wishing him good luck on his new path and that his dreams are carried out. And there was also rumours that part of the lyrics allude to marijuana, as the protagonist was abandoning the use of the drug. There's one verse where he sings Goodbye Mary and Goodbye Jane. Musically, of course, it's Rick's keyboards that drive this number steadily and steadily towards the end, where we're greeted with a wonderful guitar solo, I think, by Roger Hodgson. Breakfast in America. This is a song that Rick Davies really did not like. It was actually written by Roger Hodgson when he was about 18 or 19 years old. The song's lyrics were inspired by the fascination generated by the Beatles' visit to the US, which greatly impressed upon him. From that moment on, he dreamed of travelling to the United States to get to know firsthand everything he'd seen on TV and in the movies, especially the beautiful girls of California. Not much of a girlfriend, I never seemed to get a lot. As I said, Davies did not like this song and asked Roger Hodgson to change the lyrics. He didn't want the track to be included on the album, much less for the track to actually become the title of the album. Oh Darling, look at that lovely jangle of keyboards. It feels kind of like a throwaway Beatles number or Beatles homage to me, and fits in with the overall tone of the record. Take the Long Way Home starts with that mournful wail of the harmonica. And this is only matched in beauty by the refrain. There are times when you feel you're part of the scenery. This melodic section is very much at odds with the choppy verse, which makes the that melodic section feel like a welcome breath of fresh air, I think. There's an amount of tension that's built up in this number. It's very much about somebody leading a double life, the life on the stage, then the life at home where he just becomes part of the scenery. Interestingly, the band actually turned down an offer of $5 million from the transport company Greyhound. They wanted to use this track in their commercials for its bus transport service. Lord, Is It Mine? Another song that Rick Davies didn't particularly like. It fits in with the searching, questioning tone of this album. The verses, for me, risk becoming a little bit too mawkish, but They're salvaged, I think, by that beautiful strum of acoustic guitars during the chorus. Just Another Nervous Wreck is one of my favourites on this album. It acts as the perfect antidote for a lot of the more saccharine content, shall we say. There's a real sense of optimism in this one about overcoming and a shared misery. After all, we're all just a nervous wreck. Casual Conversations is an autobiographical number that very much addresses the breakdown in the relationship between Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson. And there was very much a resigned quality to it. I don't know what you are looking for. This track was originally called You Never Listen Anyway. Child of Vision is another Roger Hodgson number which concludes the album, in which he looks at American culture. He's very critical, in fact, of the American way of life, particularly references to food that poisons the body, Coca-Cola, and the power of television. Overall, you can't argue with the stratospheric success of this record, and it's a thoroughly enjoyable listen that is worthy of a place in everybody's collection. However, when it comes to Supertramp, I prefer the albums that come before this one, particularly Crime of the Century as their finest record. Anyway, you've been watching a review by Classic Album Review. Please do share it if you've enjoyed it. Other than that, I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.